Okay, we call this meeting of the Sebastian Budget Review Advisory Committee meeting to order. We'll start out with a roll call, please.
We're going to do the pledge? We're going to do the pledge?
Oh, okay. We'll do the pledge first then. Pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
Now we'll do the roll call.
Okay. Mr. Lewin?
Present.
Mr. Hall?
Here.
Mr. Napier?
Here.
Ms. Serta?
Here.
Ms. Ring? Here. Thank you.
Approval of the minutes from the January 13th meeting. Did everybody get a chance to review those? I'll accept the motion to approve them if there are no corrections or deletions.
Second.
All those in favor signify by aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Okay, review of the first quarterly report for fiscal 2020. Ken, you're on.
Yeah, just a thought before I start on that. Do you want to excuse the absent members?
Do you want to excuse the absent members?
Yeah, all of them, they called you, right? They called in?
Yeah, 3 of them did contact me. So that's Bruce Hoffman,
Ed?
Ed Hurley, and Kirthi Weregoda, I think is how he pronounces it.
So that only leaves, well, Ralph Holmes withdrew, right?
Yes, he's been,
So I think that's all we have, right? So they'll be excused. They called in. Now, first quarter one.
yes. What I do is give you the council agenda transmittal form, and I kind of brief the city council on the major changes to the budget during the quarter. So the first page is their transmittal. The second page is the resolution that we have them adopt to recognize any budget changes that were made during the quarter. And this is the quarter ending December 31st of 2019. The resolution I attach an Exhibit A that explains those adjustments that were either acted on by the city council specifically or are being presented at the city council meeting for approval after the fact. The ones after the fact, essentially this time, consisted of expenditures out of our R&R account, which is the renewal and replacement that we set up carved it out of the reserve accounts in general fund to cover unexpected repairs or replacements that may arise during the year. The rest of the report on that page are the adjustments that were previously authorized during that quarter by the city manager under his powers. I provide summaries, the ones with the blue ink, and I address general fund showing a summation of the revenues and expenditure accounts, showing the ending fund balance, and then I also break down that fund balance between what we started, or showing what we started the year with, what adjustments were made to the R&R account, as well as the just the basic reserve account, and show the prediction that we made during our budget preparation of what the balance would be of $5,046,000. And as you can see, the projection that is my projection, basically, where I look at the expenditures for that quarter and then project out for the next 3 quarters of this fiscal year what levels of spending and expenses we will have. And at this early in the year, it's essentially just a subtraction from the total budget minus what's spent so far. We're assuming that we'll adhere to the budget amounts. So we are in decent shape as far as the reserve account. I show a little graphic on the revenues received by category as well as the expenditures by department. And I give a update on the hurricane reimbursements. The latest information, we are still wrestling with Hurricane Matthew. There's still about $140,000 that is due to us that they have yet to authorize. Hurricane Irma, we are totally reimbursed for everything that was eligible for that event. Hurricane Dorian, we actually had expenses of about $38,000. The $34,000 shown on the graph is the amount total between the FEMA and the state funds that come to us. The FEMA pays 75%, the state pays 12.5%, and the city has to absorb the remaining 12.5%. So we continue to be diligent on that. I check their website about every other day to see if there's any action on the Hurricane Matthew items as well as Dorian. On the following page, I take the other major funds, or the ones that receive the most attention, including the Stormwater Fund, which early in the year, there's quite a few heavy or large expenditures program for stormwater that are contractual services type items, that all those didn't hit the books by the end of the third quarter, so they're a little bit light on the amount of operating expenses for the quarter. Their revenues, of course, come in, as do ad valorem taxes. Most of those are paid through the month of December. You can see we got 80% of those. Going next to the airport fund, the revenues and expense picture looks pretty favorable, very favorable actually compared to what we projected to have by the end of this fiscal year in terms of reserves. They've done quite a bit to increase their revenue stream with their rentals out there, and they've managed to actually reduce their operating costs. So we're in what I think is fairly good shape at the airport. We'd like to get to the point where all the matching grant opportunities that are out there, that we can fund the required city match from airport revenues. We've been taking them over the last number of years from our discretionary sales tax fund, so that would free up some DST monies for other purposes instead of the matching on the grants. Of course, some of those projects, when they start talking about matching the requirements to build a hangar and so forth, might be still out of reach from the airport fund for a while. On the golf course, we are projecting a little bit less in reserves than we had anticipated. They didn't end up the year quite as well as we had hoped. They're having a good year this year thus far. They've collected 27% of their charges for services. Their operating expenses are in line with the budget. On the building fund, they continue to do well. Their projected reserves by the end of this year, assuming everything is spent and received as scheduled, is actually greater than we had initially projected when we prepared the budget. A number of the following pages, we give you more detail about the revenue accounts and general fund, the expenditure accounts by department, and we list each fund of the city showing the revenue and expenditures in a summary form. So that goes on to the next page, and the next two pages actually. And then we show a schedule of each general fund department broken down by personnel services, operating expenses, and any capital. So you can kind of identify if they either are light on their budget spending or they are exceeding the expected budget spending. You can pretty much tell what area of expenditures are possibly out of line. The next report we do is one on the capital projects. We show them by year because it's usually our intent to finish up those projects that are budgeted in a year in the same year, but that often doesn't happen with the capital projects, but many of them are longer term or take longer to accomplish than just the 1 year period. Some of the larger ones there are the Stonecrop Drainage project that is subject to a grant from FEMA, and the scheduling on that. We have monies for the canal improvements that is kind of on hold at this point. And the very largest item is the relocation of the Public Works facilities at the Public Works compound. So we've got monies set aside for that, but we have not yet actually contracted for the work. We do have the engineers working towards that. The following page is an investment report, so I show where we have the city funds. It's in 3 main pots. The biggest part of that is with Seacoast National Bank, which is our designated city depository, so all our funds are deposited into Seacoast. We have some monies with the State Board of Administration, which is a money market fund that the state operates for us. And we have a smaller investment in another state-approved fund called Florida Trust. And that is a vehicle that's designed to invest longer term, up to their average needs to stay within a 2-year maturity. So you can see, as I've indicated there, the returns on the local bank account were 1.85% for the quarter. The State Board of Administration was 1.76% for the quarter, and the Florida Trust account was 1.91. I would expect those returns to be a lot less in the following quarter. The balance of the report is the accomplishments that I get from each department. They kind of highlight what activity they've had during the quarter. I won't go into detail on those, but that's actually a summary of the quarterly report for you. This is scheduled for the City Council to be on their, it is on their agenda for this Wednesday night. I've been asked to give more details. In the past, it's been on the consent agenda, but I've been asked by the City Council to give a further explanation, which those members that have been around for a while, you understand I've gone into more detail than I normally would, even with the Budget Committee, but just to kind of bring new members along and try to give you a little bit more understanding of what we report on, I've tried to expand my presentation this time. So I'd be glad to take any questions.
Ken, a question. Looking at the first quarterly report, the largest single expenditure seems to be the police department, which is running approximately 33%. The actual is 33% of the year-to-date budget.
Yes, sir.
The actual appears to be substantially higher than the previous year's actual for the same quarter. Is it something we should be concerned with going forward?
It's in line with what we allowed in our calculation of the budget in their labor contract, their collective bargaining agreement. They are permitted to cash in some sick leave, which is actually paid out in December. So that inflated their normal quarterly spending accordingly, as well as we had one of the police officers, our first one actually, that entered a drop program that we've created in the pension fund. And when they do that, they are treated like a regular employee that terminates with the city and are entitled to their payout of their accrued leave time. So with that large payout, because we had a long-term employee qualify for the drop program, and we basically paid him his accrued leave time, just like he was terminating from the city, and now he's in the drop program status, which gives them 5 years, a 5-year period on which they are going to resign no later than that 5 years. So they can start accumulating their retirement benefits. They don't actually get their hands on their retirement monies, but they start creating a balance that's earmarked in the pension fund, the pension trust fund. It's earmarked as their funds that they can receive as a lump sum once they actually do retire and leave employment of the city.
Is that only allowed to be done in the first quarter, or can they do it subsequently?
No, it's just coincidental that it happened this quarter. It's been, it was approved in the pension plan about 3 years ago as a additional benefit to the police officers. And this happens to be the first officer that's elected to actually sign up for it and commit to retiring at the end of the 5 years, or no later than the end of the 5 years.
Do we still think the year-to-date budget is good?
Yes, I think it's adequate for the remainder of the year. I think they'll be within budget, barring any excessive overtime cost, due to hurricanes or something that's out of the ordinary.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Harry?
Can I say that false alarms, we have 56 false alarms and only $100 in assessments?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm prepared to address that. It may be I know typically a lot of times there's a penalty for false alarms, but it doesn't kick in after the first one. There's,
Right.
And some of those might have been initial instances, would be my guess.
Yeah, I understand that. It's just that 56 of them, though, it seemed like there'd be more than just 3 or 4 that.
Yeah,
About
I'd be
3 to
glad to
4
pursue
times.
that and get an answer to you by email perhaps, or I can share that with the board members.
Okay, thank you.
Is that it, Harry? Any other questions?
No further questions.
No, thank you. Very good, thank you.
Welcome.
Okay, I guess we'll move on to, you're gonna go over this little presentation that you did to city council, or just, we can read that, right?
I wasn't prepared to really do the slide-by-slide type presentation, but particularly for the new members, I wanted to kind of lay out the process, and as always, I'm welcome, you're welcome to ask me individual questions at your convenience, or contact me at my office. I pretty much wanted to stress to them, that it's an ongoing process. We start like in January and don't finish up till September. And I think we're pretty good at what we do. Our history as far as revenue projections and expenditures has been, I think, successful. So kind of proud of what we've got, but we are, of course, open to suggestions or ways we can better inform the committee and the city council.
Okay, next is review the fiscal year 2021 budget objectives, and I mean, it's on the paper. You want to spend any time on that?
Well, once again, I just wanted to kind of share that with the budget committee. This did go to the city council as an agenda item. There were no comments or suggestions or by the council, but I just wanted y'all to be kind of aware of what they've essentially signed off on. I try to go through each fund and break it down in that fashion rather than be just broad objectives, but try to pin it down to things that were either legally possible or long-term policy type direction that we try to adhere to as we're preparing the budget document for review. So that's really all I wanted to share on that.
If anybody has any questions about those objectives, now would be the time to ask a question of Ken.
When will we start the budgeting process for the next fiscal year? When does that start?
Actually, you know, it's two basic processes. One is to prepare the capital program, where we look at the large expenditures on capital over the next 6 years. We've already collected from departments. They were actually due from the department heads this past Friday. So I'm in the process of pulling those into a document to kind of schedule them out so we can kind of see if projected revenues are adequate to cover them, or whether we need to slide them or adjust them in any way. So that's kind of the first piece the city manager will start reviewing in May. The department heads will submit their operating account budgets in, I think it's like May 16th or in that time frame to my office. We'll go through a process by the end of May to have the city manager endorse what we put together as far as a working draft, and to make any changes that he feels are necessary before we present it to the council. Council reviews it at a workshop in August. And while that's going on, the budget committee is getting reported on what the city manager's recommendation is, and whether, how, if you want to make comments as far as if you think we're taking the wrong approach or have any input, before it gets to the council. We go before the planning board, we go before the Parks and Rec committee, and get their viewpoints on items that pertain to their activities. And it's a long process until we get to the public hearings then in September with the city council. And usually by that time, I think everybody's on board as to what we're recommending, or you have the opportunity to say you don't agree with staff's recommendation and take a position by the committee if you choose. So
You'll get the estimated values around the first week in June, right?
it's due by June 1st for a rough estimate, and the county actually certifies and says these are the values you've got to use by July 1st.
That'll be in July.
And that's one reason the budget committee doesn't really get a working document until June. And then you can kind of see what we've developed based on what we see as revenues and what we are recommending for expenditures, as well as the capital program.
Ken, your list of the budgetary process, the outline of it, I think that's something that you ought to consider doing every year. It's not only good for the city council, but anytime there's any new members on our board. And it's a good refresher for a lot of people. I'm glad to see it in there this year. Also, the budget objectives, I'd like to see that in there too. But as the city council makes their recommendations for budget objectives, can that be further relayed to this board before we get our June update from you? If in the meantime the city council gives you directions to come within a certain percentage or so forth, can that
Generally, yes, generally I would alert the budget committee of anything the council did that would affect our direction that we're taking.
Yeah, it's in the tentative budget, right? Whatever they recommend gets rolled up in the tentative budget.
Well, it does.
The first
but
one we get to look at.
I think maybe what Mr. Hall is referring to is like
heads
if
up.
they just come up at some meeting in between now and then, and they say, we think we should reduce taxes
reduce
or,
taxes, cut
you know, if
back
they
on
make
the
any kind of
roads,
statements
whatever.
like that, I would definitely pass those on so that you, to make sure that you were in tune with that,
Appreciate it.
what they were saying.
That's all I've got.
Okay, next thing, general discussion by members. We'll start down at the other end this time. Got any general discussion you want to talk about?
Well, I was still concerned about the minutes and the motion that was not in the previous minutes that had to do with streets.
Did you bring us something?
Other than my memory, no.
I'll leave that up to Mr. Carlisle. Amber?
No further discussion.
Gil?
Just a quick question, Ken. Has anybody discussed any budget impact with the virus situation, with the schools closing, or anything that we should be looking at? I may be premature at this point, how it's going to affect us budget-wise.
Well, as far as discussion, it's been like every 2 minutes of my day, I think, for the last week has been either emails, advisory, you know, changes, or discussion by staff members, or recommendations or suggestions on how we're going about to deal with it. You know, we've got ongoing considerations about what our next step will be and how we'll handle it. I tell you, frankly, my biggest concern is not the immediate expenditures or precautions that we may take, but the long-term economic impact with what's going on nationally, with the cutting of the interest rates, the probable recession. You know, here we go again. Back in 2008, we dealt with the recession, and it's not fun. And it, you know, I kind of feel like we are at a position, even aside from the virus. You know, we were looking at a tough year in terms of balancing this coming year's budget. You know, I already saw that on the horizon because people were feeling good. You know, we were thinking we could do some additional type of improvements or betterments for the city's good. But when I start adding all those up and forecasting it and expectations of what we would like to do versus what we probably would be able to do, I think we were already right on the cusp of either tax increase or making some tough decisions to say, might be a nice thing to do, but we can't do it, you know. But now with the latest discussions on the recession and the probabilities of that, I'm just not sure yet where we're going with this year's budget, to be perfectly honest.
Harry?
Ken, again, I like your inclusion of the overview of the budgetary process. I think that's a nice touch. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Comments by staff? Ken, you got any other thing you want to share with us?
No, as indicated, and you've got your last item there about when the next meeting will be, and that's when we'll gear up and start some more detailed discussions of
And
what the
seeing no
departments are
public, I
asking.
assume we have no public comments. Like, Cindy, you want to say something? No, you're good? Okay. The next scheduled meeting is June the 15th. So everybody remember that. Anything else for the good of the order? This meeting stands adjourned.